Welcome to the Uptick podcast. I'm here with Dr. Tom Brookes from Zzeus Training. Tom, if you don't mind, just give us a little introduction about yourself and your experience.
Yeah, so I started in fire safety 30 odd years ago, working for Chubb Fire. 2002, I left them and went on my own, got my own company, and I just realised from that point, training for engineers was terrible. I used to do the training whilst I was at Chubb, which was pretty basic, but then when you went into the wider world, training was shocking. So from then onwards, I started training engineers for ourselves, really, and then more and more people came on board where they asked me if I'd train their people, and then some of the trade associations asked if I'd then start training other people's.
Yeah.
And it just went from there, really.
Yeah. And am I right in saying you had a fire business as well?
Yeah. So I've still got a fire company, which is Linden Fire Services, but my missus Shelley runs that.
Yeah.
Because Zzeus has gone ballistic over the last sort of 6 years. Yeah, so because Zzeus has gone so crazy, it takes all my time and Buddy's time, so literally we have nothing to do with the other company unless there's a big problem where they need some technical advice on getting it sorted out. So.
Yeah, cool. And specifically around like the training element, then why do you think that that's become so crucial, especially like on the fire safety side of things, in which is your bag, but also obviously you work with a lot of fire and security businesses. So training in general, why do you think it's become so critical?
I think the problem happened probably late 70s, early 80s, where prior to that, anybody doing fire systems was a fully qualified electrician, so they'd probably 5-year apprenticeship time served. So all they needed was theory knowledge of where to put detectors.
Yeah.
In the sort of 90s, a lot of the trade associations decided they were going to do theory-only qualifications, but then give somebody a, advanced installer certificate saying you're an advanced installer, yet you've not even touched a screwdriver.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a drop in quality of workmanship not because companies aren't training people, it's just they're not getting that extra bit of training where they need practical training.
Yeah.
And when I was running my company, that's what we found. We'd send guys away on some sort of training, and they'd come back and not even touch a detector. They wouldn't know what one was.
Yeah.
And they'd come back with very little knowledge, and it was then left to the other engineers to try and upskill them practically.
Yeah.
And I always thought there was something missing. So all my guys at our company, we always put them through electrical training as well as fire training, or did do historically. Whereas now, with what we do at Zzeus, we tend to do practical as well as theory. We can't fit as much practical in as we want to, because obviously we've got to get through, a lot of people training. So why it's become more important, I think, Grenfell has concentrated people's minds. And a lot of the fire businesses are now realising they've got to be able to prove that their engineers are competent.
Yeah.
And we all relied heavily on the BAFE scheme. Yeah, we're competent because of that. That just proves the company's running an SP 203 scheme that you do it the same way every time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily your engineers are competent. So, and I agree with what Dame Judith said. She wanted to see people competent, not necessarily companies, or companies as well, but people. She wanted to see them having individual training and competencies.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's concentrated it on.
And I think in terms of, like you mentioned, obviously, you focus heavily on the theory side of things, but also bringing in the practical. Obviously, being a delegate in the past, I've obviously been through the process myself as well. Why do you think, or what would you say people would say about having that hands-on practical element as well? Because it's like anything, like you can go into a classroom environment and learn the theory side of things, but put somebody in the front of a car, for example, and they've not done any practicality, that's where you tend to find that like mistakes are being made, etc. So why do you think it's important that you focused on that practical element?
It's sort of back to what I said earlier, where the practical skills went probably in the 90s. But we get two types of people come to our place. They're either fully in industry, been in there 10, 15, 20 years, and they need a qualification, which those guys are more wanting the theory side of it because they've got the practical skills for running cables, detectors, that sort of stuff. But then we get the new starters that have got no practical skills whatsoever, and a lot of companies will send it to us, so they've not got any bad habits coming on. We can show them the right ways and the ways they should be looking at the recommendations in the standard, etc., so that they've not got bad habits to start with.
Yeah.
But everybody who leaves our place, as you well know, will wire up a minimum of a non-addressable panel, and if you're there on the Friday, you're wiring up an addressable panel as well and programming it. So we can't give them everything because it's only 5 days.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But it's better than nothing, and it's better than what was happening in industry. I'd like to do more practical. At the moment, we're struggling getting a new tutor because we could put a lot more on and do a lot more training. But it's we've been a victim of our own success, if you like. We have got that many people on a backlog coming to us that we're struggling to do any more than we do.
Yeah. And we was chatting on a separate podcast around, like, obviously you've alleviated to it a little bit in terms of, like, you've got industry people that are coming there more so for the theory side of things, but we've spoke about, like, multidiscipline engineers, obviously having a one-stop shop fits all, so to speak. Have you found that you've got more and more security engineers coming to you to learn the fire aspect out of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. The main two we get, if they're experienced guys, are electricians who they're already doing fire systems, but they want to be able to sign them off. They want to be doing commissioning. Yeah. So they've got all the practical skills. They can run cable, etc. And the other guys are security people, where their companies want to be doing everything.
Yeah.
And it's easy if you're a security engineer going into a premises. You've already got their ear. You can talk them into changing views to the fire system as well as the security system. So clients like it because they're only having one guy come to their building rather than having 2 or 3 different people. And if they've got that trust with somebody, why not upskill them so they can do fire systems as well?
Yeah. And I think, like, in terms of the discussion that we had earlier, more so for validation than anything, there seems to be a bit of a mixed bag in terms of opinions of some engineers, and you obviously meet, and Buddy meets, like, multiple engineers on a weekly basis, but do you hear much around, like, engineers wanting to purely stay in fire or purely stay in security, or do you see that, like, people are actually okay about being multidisciplined?
That depends on what type of company they seem to come from. If they come from a big national company, often they just want to specialise in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas if they come from smaller companies, they tend to do everything, or they may do emergency lighting, security, as well as fire systems. So that's the sort of mix we've found it. And sole traders or electricians who are on their own, they definitely want to be doing various disciplines, because while they're on site, they're maximising their profit because they're already there.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And they're not having to get the tools out at different places. They're going to be there for a couple of days doing the fire system, the electric, and the security. So, but the larger companies, people like Chubb and Protec, they tend to have an engineer that will specialise in maybe maintenance of fire systems, security. So I find it tends to be the bigger ones that don't tend to multi-skill so much.
Yeah. And in terms of, like, the challenges for those sort of companies, like, what do you think, like, the challenges are in the future for companies when it comes to, like, training of their staff? Do you find many people that are really challenging the price of these courses? Do you feel that it's we just don't have the time to do it? Like, where do you think the biggest challenges face?
I think the biggest challenges for companies is having their guys off the road.
Yeah.
Because the industry is so busy at the moment and everybody's sort of under pressure. We've recently had a load of guys come to us from one company, but they had to split them up over several weeks because they just couldn't have 5 people off the road to be off. Yeah. So I think the time away costs them more than the actual cost of the course.
Yeah.
They're in a hotel for 4 or 5 days. They're not earning the company any money for 4 or 5 days. That's probably a bigger chunk than actual paying for the training. So that's, I think, where the challenges are for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, being in the industry, like when I came offline, obviously, it's then workload starts to creep up, and then certainly when you send in engineers to the course, it's like trying to then cover their region. So I think it is something that can affect people, and I suppose, is there necessarily a solution? I don't know. I think in some cases it's a case of you've just got to bite the bullet and accept it. Like, quite a common theme from a lot of today's discussions is, like, short-term pain, long-term gain. Yeah. Like, you've just got to accept that the engineers need the training. But I'm interested to hear from yourself, like, obviously you're predominantly dealing, I would imagine, with, like, engineering managers, ops managers, directors, etc., that are arranging the training for their staff. Do you often hear much from engineers that they're typically coming to you guys to do the training, but there's a common message around they're not really getting other training in the industry?
Some, but the bulk of the people who come to us, I think their management have sort of bought into the whole idea of we need to train people.
Yeah.
So we'll often speak to them, and there'll be I don't know, on a security course in a couple of weeks' time, or they'll be on maybe an emergency lighting course. So we get a lot engineers that way. Where we tend to get the management of companies is they will want to do the MVQ, which is the high level.
Yeah.
And it's basically a portfolio of proving their skills, what they can do, and we just guide them through it on our portal and then go and do an audit on them. So that's a sort of high level where the engineers can then aim for at a later date after they've done our training, then a few years experience down the line. But I say most of the people who come with us, I think they've bought into the idea that they need to train people. And with the Building Safety Act now stating that when there's a big build, there's an accountable person, and he or she has to check if people are competent who are working on that site.
Yeah.
So it may be that I've got a team of fire engineers on that site, and the main contractor, who's the accountable person, maybe he needs to check that I've checked all my guys.
Yeah.
So it's sort of cascading down, and I think as the law becomes more solid and more regulations come in, I think it will get tighter that way.
Yeah.
When I spoke to Dame Judith at one of the meetings, she thought it was going to take 10 years to get everybody on board with this, and I think she's probably right, somewhere around that. But we're finding more and more people who just need to get their engineers trained, and the management want them to have that bit of paper that says, yeah, they have got these skills they say they've got.
But don't want to pay for it.
Yeah, well, nobody wants to pay for anything, do they, really? I mean, the world's a tight place at the moment for money, isn't it? So it's got to be value for money, and I think that's where we fit in. They do deem that what we do is value for money.
Yeah.
But I say the bigger cost for the companies is the being
engineers being off the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you've obviously got the knock-on effect of like service delivery side of things and a whole range of factors. So, and in terms of like retention of engineers and obviously recruiting new engineers that are coming through, what's your thoughts on where training fits with that as well?
I think most companies are struggling for decent staff at the moment. We've been busy now since way before COVID, and we worked right through COVID training engineers. There's just not enough in the fire sector qualified. And when we first looked at it after Grenfell Working Group 2, which was installers and of systems in buildings, not just fire systems, but installers in general, we think in the fire sector there was probably less than 5,000 people actually qualified in it, and probably around 45,000 people doing it.
Yeah.
So there's a big chunk of people between then and now having to get upskilled.
Yeah.
And that's without the new guys coming in who, I think you spoke to David Scott earlier from Skills, where they're sort of grabbing the apprentices and getting them on board.
Yeah.
We tend to work more with the experienced workers and
the
guys there. So it's sort of a double-pronged approach, if you like. People like Skills and the apprenticeship are sort of getting the younger people on board, and we sort of try and get the experienced workers so they can prove their competency.
Yeah.
Most of them are competent, it's just they've got no proof because there was no qualifications.
No certification, yeah. And in terms of like, I'm sure I'm probably asking you a very open question here, and I'm sure you could chat about it all day, but what do you think needs to be done for the industry? Like, you've just given me some numbers there around like 5,000, was it competent people trained,
qualified, probably.
but potentially 45,000 doing it. Like, what do we need to do to change the narrative there? Like, what needs to happen in the industry?
I think people need to realise that if they're going to do a fire system, they can't just be an electrician. And I don't say that blasé. Electricians are highly skilled people, but they're often not trained in fire systems. And when I have a look at some systems, if an electrician's done a bad job, you tend to find all the cable work is perfect, containment's perfect, but the detectors are in the wrong place.
Yeah.
If it's the other way around and it's a fire company that's done a bad job, you tend to find the cable work's terrible.
Yeah.
But all the detectors are in the right place, and I think everybody's got to meet in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
And have those practical skills. But there's far more people within the fire alarm sector that don't know a lot about the wiring regulations, for instance, which they should do if they're installing fire systems. So it's sort of getting everybody to meet in the middle, really. Yeah.
And how do you think, in terms of like, obviously there's key players in the industry in terms of like governing bodies? Obviously you mentioned like the likes of BAFE. Obviously on security side you've got the likes of NSI, SSCIB, and many more governing bodies that are out there in this sector. Do you think there's anything that they can be doing to almost like police that in some way, shape or form?
Yeah, I think BAFE and the certification bodies such as NSI and BSI, etc., that they go around doing the audits of the companies for the BAFE scheme. I honestly think they should tighten up on what they're checking on the engineers, and I do know some of them are.
Yeah.
They are checking more and more how qualified, how competent are your engineers, and I think if it tightens up that way as well, it will make the industry better.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to have rubbish engineers. I mean, I've got a big poster in our hallway which it's got pictures of bad workmanship that one of our engineers did that doesn't work for us anymore, and it says you're only as good as your worst engineer.
Yeah.
And
I think I saw some of them on the training course.
Yeah, so you need to audit your guys, and internal audits are really important. But also, if you're having audits from people like BAFE or NSI, get them to audit your engineers. Don't always just send them on that perfect job. When they come and audit my other company, once a year we have a maintenance audit, and we literally just send them out with an engineer servicing.
Observe what they're doing.
Whoever is closest to Lincoln that day, that's who he goes out with. And so far it's all worked out fine. But
I think it's quite interesting that obviously, like, you talk about the internal like the competency checks as well, because this isn't necessarily just like the book doesn't stop at like BAFE or NSI, SSRB, BSI, etc. doing their checks. There's also an element of this that might sit like with the regional managers, the engineering managers, that should also have the ability to go out and do like technical and competency checks of their engineers. Do you find much of that for the companies? Like, obviously no names given, but do you find that happens much, or do you hear much of it?
Some don't, and I understand the pressures of when you're running a company. It's hard to sort of go out, 10, 15 days a year just to auditing your own engineers. You've got enough work to do, but it is crucially vital. And so this engineer we had a few years ago really taught me a lesson on it. It's a guy who'd been with me a while. I've been on jobs with him where he's done really good work, but he just slacked off and was doing shoddy work. Whereas if I'd have gone out audited him 3 or 4 times a year, it would have kept him on his toes.
Yeah, I think there's an element as well where it's like complacency starts to slip in when things don't get managed, so to speak. And I think, like, without speaking out of turn, I think there's an element of that could, in some ways, describe the fire industry at times. Like, we've become complacent, and then it takes like a tragedy to happen to then like give everybody a bit of a shake up and a wake up call to say change is needed. Like, do you see much of that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with how Grenfell's gone, I think it sort of really focused it, and because it's carried on, people are more aware of it now. Whereas if that had been hushed up and gone under the carpet and disappeared, I think we would have all possibly gone back to it's all right in this industry. And it needed to tighten up. We needed to do better, and if anything can come from those tragedies, the tragic deaths, is if we are improving competency of fire system engineers, then they haven't died in vain for me.
Yeah. And in terms of your training course, as I say, I've been on it. I can attest to obviously what gets done and how it engages with like the delegates that are on the training itself. What advice would you give to companies that are potentially like teetering on the edge of, do I send my engineers on this course? Like, in terms of how engaging like your sessions are.
When I speak to managers who are sort of umming and ahhing or they not sure, I always say to them, send me your best person that needs training.
Yeah.
Who will give you good feedback when he gets back to your place, and I guarantee you'll send every one of your engineers.
Yeah.
And I'm that confident in what we do.
Yeah.
I always ask them, send your best guy that will give you good feedback. And so far it's worked.
Yeah.
Every company we work for send more and more engineers.
Yeah. And I think that's like, it's important to have that consistency in place. Like, there's no good, I've seen it in the past where you typically send like 1 or 2 people in certain regions, and then you kind of hope that it's kind of train the trainer type environment, and people still see that as well. They're competent, like they've done the training. They haven't. Do you see much of that?
We used to. You see that a lot, but I say that the people we tend to deal with now are, I think, sold on the idea of becoming more professional companies, picking up better work, because the end users now want quality jobs doing. They understand that potentially they've all got the potential of going to court over a system that's been installed badly. Not just the person who's installed it, potentially the owner of the building could do. So I think they want a better job doing, and a lot
Yeah.
of the companies we deal with, they are trying to raise their game and their engineers' game. So I don't see it so much. I'm not sure whether other trade associations see it more that way, where they deal with different types of companies. But most of the people we deal with are small to medium enterprises.
Yeah.
We do one or two big places. I mean, we do all the engineers from Gatwick and places like that, where they've got a skilled team of fire engineers, and Gatwick quite rightly want them to be able to prove their competence. So so we do get big companies, but most of the people who come to us, I think, are already sold on the idea that they want to prove their worth in the industry, if you like.
Yeah. And in terms of like, obviously the industry, as we've spoke about a little bit, in terms of like cross training the engineers, I think it's, in my opinion personally, I think it's something that it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, in a sense of, I think there are benefits being being a service provider to having multidisciplined engineers, but I also do think that like there's such a strength to have like experts in their own sectors. What's your kind of opinion on potentially like embracing cross training for some of the larger or even smaller fire and security companies?
I think it's the way to go. My other company, which I was talking about earlier, we only tend to lose jobs to competitors if they're doing multi-skills, because that company only does fire.
Yeah.
It's done fire since 2002.
Yeah.
We don't do security. I mean, I know very little about security as such. So that's the time we lose jobs, is if somebody, say they've got a security engineer there that can do fire, emergency lighting,
The job lot.
That's when we tend to lose it. We don't lose it any other way.
Yeah.
Or very rarely.
And I think, like, well, I know, like, I've seen it firsthand that there's often a race to the bottom, in a sense of, like, there's positives to multidiscipline in a sense of, like, carbon footprint, engineer satisfaction, like, cross-skilling those engineers. But I think, like, the downside of what I see in the industry is the race to the bottom. Because what you often tend to find is that these companies are cross-skilling their engineers to the point where they can do, like, almost 50% of most systems, if you like, and then it's almost this race to the bottom where they're undercutting each other. And the companies that really provide that excellent level of service, like just as a fire alarm engineer or just as a security engineer, are the ones that are tending to almost like come down on their pricing, etc. And I think that's probably like similar to what you've just described, in a sense that you can't really compete with somebody that's like just constantly trying to drive down the price. Do you hear or see much of that yourself?
Yeah, you're going to get that, and anybody can cut the price down to the bare bones. And are you going to do a good job that way? Probably not. It's it's part of it, but I do think the way, especially like with the Building Safety Act on high risk buildings, I think the people now running those sites realise that they can't just allow anybody in there. They've got to be skilled at what they're doing. And I have quite a bit to do with the ECS cards, and we're now finding more and more that sites are asking for ECS cards. And if somebody's doing a more technical role on a site, they want to see them with the gold card or the manager card or whatever it may be. So, yeah, it's going to take a few years for that to filter through to all industry. But I believe long term, I don't think there'll just be the ECS card. I think there'll be other things, but they'll all feed into some register. I do think that long term we'll all have to be able to prove it, and we'll be on some sort of central government register.
Is that like, do you see that as like the holy grail, if you like, in terms of like, if I'm, whether it's it's got to be a specific engineer, but being able to almost be like check a trade into it, like you look at that person, you're able to get like a full overview on that person and prove their competency. And ultimately, if they want the work, they shouldn't be wanting to hide away from that in any way, shape, or form. Is that like the holy grail for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see. I think it's the Australian system where you have to be licensed to do it.
Yeah.
And you actually have to apply for a physical license, prove who you are.
Yeah.
At the moment, probably the ECS card is the nearest we've got to that, where you as an end user could go online, check my ECS card out, and it'll tell you exactly what qualifications I've got, any CPD, all that sort of stuff on the card.
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't prove that you're competent only proves what qualifications you've got. But if you've got a stack of qualifications, it stands a chance you've been in industry a while. You can check the dates of those, so you know that Tom's been in industry 30 years. You can prove back to then.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if you've got two people side by side and you've got somebody that's got all these certifications, has done their time to do their due diligence on like their own career growth, their own competencies, etc. And then on the other hand, I have somebody here that's been around for 20 years but lacks any certification in any way, shape or form, like you're naturally going to sway towards the person that's got the certification aspect. So I don't think you're ever going to make it like completely belts and braces, because ultimately like it does come down to the work that they actually do on site as well. But I completely agree on the fact that like I would love, it's almost like on a recruitment side of things as well, like being able to just quickly look on a register. This person's telling me that they want a job for X, Y, Z reasons. Being able to validate that they've gone through the competency side of things that you would expect to then sell them to a potential service provider in the future.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. If you're in any industry, you've got to be able to prove what you can do.
Yeah.
And if you can't prove that through qualifications, how else do you prove it?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the beauty of the EAL MVQ that we're doing now for the experienced worker. You've been in industry 10 years, say. You can do all these things. We normally sit them through our exam as well.
Yeah.
So we can prove the theory side of what they've got, and then we'll go on jobs with them, or we'll get them videoing and installing a panel, installing this. So the guys who have been in industry a long time, they can prove that they are a real high level. But where there's an issue at the moment, the guys coming out of the apprenticeship, and I don't know if David mentioned this earlier, they're doing a 3-year apprenticeship, and they're coming out with a lot higher qualifications than some of the guys that have been teaching them.
Yeah, yeah.
So all of a sudden, the guys that have been teaching them are going, hang on a minute, this guy's more qualified than me, and he's actually asking for more money than me.
Yeah.
And these people are becoming valuable. I mean, we as you know, we do the 100% Club. We've stopped putting people's names on there, where we tend to put the company's name on now, because people are getting poached, because if they're getting 100% in our exam, at least they know that theory-wise they've got it.
That's why I moved to software sales. I think I got 94.
Yeah. You still did better than some in the industry.
No, I'll have to resit it again.
Yeah.
But talking so in terms of like, and listen, I agree with that. And we often, if I look at Uptick's perspective to put that into like real life, we look at our Uptick Academy, for example, and our way from job management is proving that somebody's competent is by saying, go through the academy, and at the end of it, you'll get certification, etc. Like, that's no different to actually, like, your holy grail is being able to see that somebody's in the 100% club of Zzeus Training. Yeah.
I mean, the 100% club is really aimed at people at a high level. I mean, to get 100% in that exam, and you've sat it, Carl, it's not easy.
No.
And, I mean, we've had people from industry come to try and prove it's too easy and not get anywhere near it. So
hopefully I beat those people.
You did, actually. No names mentioned. So the 100% club is good, and obviously the guys doing the MVQ, they tend to go on to do the MVQ, because they are at a real high level. And I mean, some of the guys who come to us are maybe in the 50s. We had one guy, he's 66, and he'd never done a qualification in his whole life, and he'd come to us and he sailed through it, got 100%, and happy days. It's proved he could do it.
Yeah,
and that's what they all need to do nowadays, is actually prove it.
If I remember correctly, I remember the session actually, and there was an older chap on the session that I was on, and I remember there was a few conversations at times where it's like his answer was technically right in his mind, but actually the times have evolved, standards have changed, and actually it was quite a bit of an eye opener for him in particular, where he was like, actually, I'm not quite as where I thought I should have been in terms of like competency and how I'm working now. He's probably a very competent engineer, but ultimately the times are always evolving. And I think that kind of leads me on to my next point around like the compliance and obviously you see with the governing bodies, etc. Where do you feel like training sits in with that? Because obviously compliance is always changing, like with the fire safety order, etc. You've got tons of things that are always evolving. Where does training sit in that?
I mean, I think it's right in the centre of it all. We recently had a bit of a debate at the British standards, because the standard is changing, and we have changed the competency clause, and I'm always pushing to get training in there and things like that. And I was told by somebody that just because somebody's trained doesn't mean they're competent. I said, well, if they're not trained, they're really not competent, are they? 'Cause somebody's got to train you on whatever you're doing, whether that's in-house training or a physical training course. If you've not trained, how can you even be competent? So, training doesn't make you competent.
Yeah,
you've got to still have the behaviours to go with that.
Correct. Yeah. The attitude to want to do the job right, etc.
Yeah. I mean, when I was more involved with the our fire company, I would rather take somebody on with the right attitude than somebody that's maybe been in the industry 10 years who has got the wrong attitude.
Yeah.
And work with them and train them up. So the certification bodies, I think, are key to this.
Yeah.
Because if they start checking more and more training competency, which they definitely are at the moment, there's a lot more of a drive to it. Currently, BAFE asks for the lead person to be a level 3 qualified, but I do believe longer term it will be all operatives have to be at least a level 3 qualification. But BAFE aren't silly; they realise the same as we all did, that you can't suddenly ask 45,000 people overnight to get
training. Yeah.
So I think they've concentrated on the sort of lead roles to get them upward skilled, and then the next step will be the rest of industry. But, it's going to take time.
And I agree with what you said there. Like in terms of, I often joke about it, but I've been hiring recently, and I'll get CVs sent over, and I always have a scan through the CVs, but I never judge somebody purely on a CV alone. Like obviously it's different from my perspective, obviously in sales, but when I meet the people, it's like, can I hold the conversation with that person? How do they present themselves? Like, is there a natural desire to want to like be successful? And I think like there's many of occasions, and I've probably even mentioned this in the past, where like we've met engineers, you can very quickly tell the competency of somebody by just putting a multimeter in front of them and asking them to set it in a certain way. And that's what we used to do with engineers previously, where it's a case of put it in front of them, they start getting all flustered, and it's like, well, you're clearly not used to using that, therefore you're probably not doing the right things on site. So there's certain things that the industry can do in terms of like putting improvements in place, and I think ultimately the governing bodies can really help with that as well. For me, in my mind and my opinion, I think the more that BAFE, NSI, the governing bodies in general, the more that they do to actually make it more of a mandatory requirement, I think is actually going to go a long way for the industry. Because ultimately, if they allow it to be quite relaxed and a flexible approach, if you like, I think that's where potentially corners are going to get cut.
Yeah, I mean, when you think back, the fire system world, probably in the early 90s, it was a bit like the Wild West, really.
Yeah.
You give somebody some tools and off they went servicing fire alarms. And I had some meetings a few years ago with some government ministers, and just walking back from this meeting, and this particular MP couldn't believe that you could be a fire engineer and have no qualifications whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we just stopped at a few shops on the way back and just said, let's go and have a look at these systems as we come in. And we said, well, that's wrong with that, that's wrong with that, that's wrong. I said, all these systems have been put in by people with no actual qualifications or anything. And they were quite horrified that you could put a life safety system in with no prerequisite qualification skills. I mean, one of the big tests we have at our place is on Wednesday, which is installation day, we always have multifunction testers out where we're testing continuity and insulation of cables, which is part of the standard. Yeah. And you'd be surprised how many people don't do it or don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And, it's a skill they've got to have. But, we show them how to do it. And then it's up to them then when they go back to their companies to say, right, we need to do this.
Yeah.
So I say it's like a double pronged approach. They've got to have training, but the certification bodies need to push it. And if they sort of police it, people will get trained more.
Yeah. No, I agree. And in terms of so just as a bit of a wrap up, like from your perspective, obviously you've been through the mill yourself in terms of running a fire business. You're now obviously training people on a day-to-day basis, or buddy is whilst you're enjoying the motorbike. What would your advice be to fire and security companies, whether it's owners, directors, engineering managers, or engineers themselves? What would your advice be to them in terms of their approach to training?
You need to sort of get a skills matrix of your guys. So if you've got several guys that just do maintenance, then obviously concentrate on the maintenance side of it. anybody who's doing installation side, you need to also look into wiring regs and electrical qualifications or training, as well as the fire side of it. So you need to sort of look at the skill set, what you guys have already got,
Yeah.
what you want them to do, and go from there. But we've recently had some discussions with some companies. I can't name them because it was NDAs involved and things. But what they were saying is they have maintenance engineers that don't need to know design because they only do maintenance, and we tell them how to do maintenance.
Yeah.
So my conversation with them was, well, what do they do when there's something wrong?
Yeah.
So they said, oh yeah, well, we send a more skilled engineer. I said, but if that guy doesn't know it's wrong, how does he ask for the skilled engineer to come?
Yeah.
So to me, they've got to have at least the minimum of what we do of design, installation, maintenance and commissioning. Then they can specialise then in whatever their company needs them to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, they need to not shy away from it and look at everybody as individuals of what do they want out of life, as well as what do you need them to. And you might find that some guy you've got just doing maintenance could be the most fantastic commissioning engineer ever.
Yeah.
And it's sort of not judging until you know what they want to do as well.
Yeah, cool. And tradition on the podcast, we get a question from the previous guests. So your question was, if you wasn't in the fire industry now, where would you see yourself?
Well, as a kid, I always wanted to be a stuntman. So I used to watch...
That's where the bike comes into play then.
Well, I used to love Evil Knievel as well. I used to watch The Fall Guy as a kid. I don't think you're old enough to remember that.
Far too young for that, Tom.
But yeah, I used to love The Fall Guy, so I always just think, God, that's got to be the career for me. But yeah, it never worked out.
Nice. Well, listen, I've always admired you. Like we've obviously got a great friendship outside of this as well, and I think what you're doing for the fire safety industry is like so admirable. So thanks for taking the time to come on, and hope you've enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
All right.
Cheers.
So obviously you're talking to fire and security owners, directors, etc. How would you say that they can try and get their engineers more engaged with like the training aspect themselves?
I think they need to make the engineer realise, or the technician. I mean, I call them engineers. As you know, I'm a chartered engineer for fire systems, and there's only 2 of us in the country. And I've got this big issue that they should be called engineers, but technically they're technicians.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of getting them to realise that if they upskill, they can earn more money.
Yeah.
They can be in the management roles later. They've got a more solid career progress.
Yeah.
Rather than just being a labourer that's pulling cable in or something like that. They can move through companies, and it makes them more valuable to the company, which in turn surely has got to mean they can earn more money within that company.
Yeah.
So, we get a lot of good engineers or technicians that really do want to go forward, and I think it's sort of ingraining that in guys that, or including ladies. I mean, we get a lot of females to our centre, and being honest, that most of the females go into more management roles within fire sector. Don't know why, but they seem to climb the ladder a bit faster, whereas a lot of the younger guys who come in, they want to be on the tools. They want to be wiring things. So I've always said there's 2 types of people. There's academics and logical thinkers, and most engineers are logical thinkers.
Yeah.
They're not actually academics. I mean, I'm terrible at academia. I struggle reading. As you know, when I've got PowerPoint on the screen, I struggle to read it. I have to look at the pictures and then I'll tell you about it.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of getting these guys that may not have great reading skills, but tell them you can be a fire engineer.
Yeah.
You don't need to be an A1 student in reading and writing, but you can still earn a good living from the fire sector.
Yeah.
Most guys, if they stay within it and work well, younger guys progressing can easily be on 50, 60,000 a year as a highly skilled, say, commissioned engineer or something like that. So there's a real good progress for them, but I think companies need to, when somebody comes to them new, I don't know, 19, 20, whatever, actually tell them what the career path could be.
Yeah.
And where they could earn money. And that's the way I think of it.
Yeah, I think, listen, that's a great point. And I suppose if I look back and reflect on some of the discussions that I had with maybe some of our younger engineers, did I do that? Probably not. So I think there's a clear takeaway from me there that if I didn't do it, how many other people are not doing it, in a sense of like laying out that clear structure of...
Yeah, the problem is, though, as a manager like yourself, when you was doing it, you've got the pressure of getting the work done.
Yeah.
You can't always concentrate on talking somebody through it, but I think we all need to. Now, whether you send an engineer out with another engineer and he mentors him and says, look, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can build up and you can do this. I don't know what the answer is, but if we can get the people coming into industry to realise there is a real good career path for them within the fire alarm sector. So I've got up to chartered engineer. I can't get any higher in what I do.
Yeah.
And if you'd have asked me 5 or 6 years ago, would that even be possible? I'd have told you no. And
why do you think?
There was no such thing as fire alarm competency enough to get you to chartered engineer level, which is master's degree level.
Yeah.
So although I've got a doctorate, it's not actually in fire; it's in management.
Yeah.
So that didn't count.
Yeah.
So I had to prove competency up to chartered engineer level within other things.
Yeah.
But it can be done. And do you know Jacob Derrick? I don't know if you know Jacob. He's recently gone through it, and I've helped Jacob through it.
I think I do, actually. He's I see him on LinkedIn.
Yeah, he's on LinkedIn quite a lot. Brilliant guy. I mean, he's a young guy at the moment, and I do think he will be a leading light in our industry in the future. It'd be a good one on your podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I helped Jacob through it, and there's a few other guys who were fellas at IET that helped him. And yeah, so there's only him and I now who are chartered engineers for fire alarm systems in the UK.
Wow.
But there is a path there. We can get people there, and anybody who does our MVQ, they can actually get to EngTech fairly quickly if they want to, and be a member of IET. So there is that progression. And again, back to the younger guys coming in, it's not a dead end job. That you have got a progression if you want to be professionally registered.
We spoke about it a few times. Like you're not going to go home to your kids and be like describing the fire and security industry as a sexy industry.
Yeah.
Like I think we've had a common theme today about that, but actually it's a really cool industry in terms of like where the innovation is around like some of the products that we're seeing, like some of the technology that's on the market at the minute. Like it is a really exciting industry. And I think like with people like yourself and hopefully what we're trying to do as well, like we're going to continue to innovate the industry as well.
Well, I mean, you have done, how your company's grown over the last few years has been amazing, but that's down to what you offer.
Yeah.
On training, another issue that I always try and encourage people who come to us is don't just do our training on the standards and the regulations. Go to the manufacturers, because most manufacturers do free training on their products. And I know Advanced do some fantastic training on their panels, because we sometimes will sit it, and why not get that?
Yeah.
If you're installing advanced panels as an example, why would you not want to have their training?
Yeah.
It sets you ahead of the competition. That they might be cheaper than us, but are they trained by Advanced?
Yeah.
Have they got all those skills? Have they got the programming software?
Yeah.
So there's much more out there for training just than doing sort of the apprenticeship or what we are doing with the experienced worker. Get with the manufacturers. Apollo, a Cheeky, they all do training. And usually it's free of charge if you buy their products.
So obviously you spent like 30 years in this sector so far. Is there a memorable moment that just lives in your mind rent free?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest places I went to was, and we still do some sort of national security places, but I did some training on the Clyde nuclear submarine base a while ago, and to be escorted to your training room every morning with a Marine with a machine gun was quite different.
Nice.
On training wise, some of the biggest buzzers I get is when we get guys that are struggling. We had one a couple of years ago now who's had severe dyslexia, and on the morning it struggled all week. He'd not passed a single mock paper all week, and on the morning of the exam, I was sort of trying to coach him to get him through it, and he said, "Tom, don't worry, I'm used to failing exams," and he passed it.
Yeah,
and
the reward feeling from that
still gets me now. Honestly, it still gets me now because it's like we were both sort of in tears.
Yeah.
And something like that really makes it worthwhile.
You nearly got me there, Tom. Yeah. You did that deliberately, didn't you?
No, honestly, when I think about him, I still well up a bit with it because he'd never passed an exam in his life. And to get him through it.
And to have that mindset of, I'm kind of going to fail, so it's all right.
Yeah. Well, he said to me, "Don't worry, Tom. I always fail him."
Yeah.
And
he passed.
Yeah, passed it. And
kudos to that guy.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. He's in the industry now. And we had another guy. He weren't so much struggling that way, but he'd come out of. I'm trying to think what industry he was in. I think he was in security, and he'd literally, just before he came to us, he'd lost his house, he'd gone through all sorts of problems, and we sort of worked with him quite a lot, and afterwards we sort of helped him and advised him, and we saw him last year at the fire safety event, and he came up to us and says, "You've turned my life around."
Really?
Yeah, I've got a house, I've got my own business now, I'm doing really well. 5 years later, I've gone from sort of living on the streets to actually
making something
myself, and times like that really get you.
Yeah, I think that's why you've got to look at it as like almost through a fresh pair of eyes, so to speak, in a sense of like training can really help in that matter, not whether it's to that extreme or whether it's to a case of just like taking that step up in your career. I mean, if I was to be like really brutal with myself, did Uptick look at the qualification that I gained from your course in particular? No. But in terms of, did it put me in a position where I was confident enough to actually be speaking to people on a day-to-day basis about the things that I am? 100%. So it was a massive tick in the box for me. And whilst I've not necessarily put it into practice on the engineering aspect, it's put me in a great position to be able to comfortably talk to people about this topic.
Yeah, I mean, you can hold a conversation within the fire alarm system world with anybody.
Yeah.
Because of the knowledge you've got.
Yeah.
Just because you don't crawl around lofts putting cables in, you make you
These hands aren't made for that.
less knowledgeable. I will spend the rest of my career training engineers.
Yeah.
And I say engineers, not technicians.
Not technicians.